We talk a lot about technical threats and security, but I think our biggest challenge is actually the diversity and scale of innovation that's going on at any one point right now. So, we're used to hearing the big name companies, the Netflixes and things of the world and what they're building. But for every one organization like that, there are thousands all around the world that are just starting out, that are being built. There's innovative technologies in every single field. One simple environment that we can go, hey, yep, here's the risks, here's the threats, here's what we need to do. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of different environments and different cultures. Our large companies, well, they have a lot. They have a lot of people, they have a lot of budget, they have a lot of time in respect to having a lot of people. They may have specialists on team that can actually be the voice of security all the way through their various product teams. Now, outside of the larger organizations, the average size of a security team is 1.9 people. So for our smaller organizations, we have to be more nimble. We have to, instead of seeing it as a specialist job that sits outside of our engineering teams, or not just saying, hey, this is your responsibility and you should do something to your team, but it's also giving them the accountability, the agency, and the resources they need to actually be able to take steps. So for our younger companies, you actually end up building a security team the size of your company in some ways.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity SafeStack Talk series. Today we have Laura with us. Laura has a very esteemed background, which I'm going to share with you right now. She's an accomplished cybersecurity expert and visionary leader who currently serves as the CEO of SafeStack, a cutting-edge security firm. A sought-after keynote speaker, Laura is an unwavering security optimist on a mission to build a team of 30 million security-minded software developers. With a strong background in education, Laura has been a lecturer in application security at the prestigious Developers Institute. Her dedication to cybersecurity goes beyond her professional role, as she also contributes her time and expertise as a board member of Hackers Helping Hackers in Australia and serves as the vice chair of the New Zealand Internet Task Force. Before venturing into the world of startups, Laura had an impressive career in both government and the private sector. She worked as an information security consultant for the government, where she helped protect sensitive information and maintain the integrity of critical systems. Laura has gained valuable experience in the corporate world during her time at KPMG, where she was an integral part of the Information Security Risk Advisory Division. Laura's passion for technology and cybersecurity can be traced back to her academic pursuits, where she graduated with a degree in computer science and artificial intelligence. Very, very timely for our current phase of computing history. This strong foundation has allowed her to become a thought leader in her field, inspiring others to join her in the fight for a more secure digital world. It is our privilege to speak to you, Laura, today. Over to you. Are you ready for the first question?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So, Laura, let's get right into it. As a security optimist and CEO of SafeStack, what do you see as the most significant challenges in the cybersecurity landscape today? And how can we as an industry overcome them?
Well, I think we talk a lot about technical threats and security, but I think our biggest challenge is actually the diversity and scale of innovation that's going on at any one point right now. So, we're used to hearing the big name companies, the Netflixes and things of the world and what they're building. But for every one organization like that, there are thousands all around the world that are just starting out, that are being built. There's innovative technologies in every single field. And so when we're talking about security, we're not talking about, one simple environment that we can go, hey, yep, here's the risks, here's the threats, here's what we need to do. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of different environments and different cultures. And so we need security approaches, technologies, and kind of leaders who can adapt to those. Because what we do in a big, huge US-based enterprise isn't necessarily going to work to a cutting-edge robotics company or the future of health tech.
So, Laura, could you dive a little bit deeper into this? What works at a large company may not work at a cutting-edge smaller company. How should the smaller companies adapt?
Yeah, well, Large companies, well, they have a lot. They have a lot of people. They have a lot of budget. They have a lot of time in respect to having a lot of people. And as a result, they have the ability to, say if we look at the software development lifecycle, for example, they may have specialists on team that can actually be the voice of security all the way through their various product teams. Now, outside of the larger organizations, the average size of a security team is 1.9 people globally. That's tiny. That is not enough to do your basic risk and compliance, let alone get into AppSec as well. So for our smaller organizations, we have to be more nimble. We have to, instead of seeing it as a specialist job that sits outside of our engineering teams or sits, next to the executive team, it has to become part of all of our roles. And so that's not just saying, hey, this is your responsibility and you should do something to your team, but it's also giving them the accountability, the agency, and the resources they need to actually be able to take steps. So for our younger companies, you actually end up building a security team the size of your company in some ways. But we don't always see it like that. Sometimes we see it as something we get to later.
Okay. Thanks for sharing this. You have a mission that you've shared, 30 million security-minded software developers. Can you share more about this? How did you develop this vision?
Sure. Well, there's 30 million software developers in the world right now, and it grows at a rate of about 1.2 million new engineers a year, which I don't think, it's very difficult to comprehend how many people that is. And that's all around the world. Now, right now, we have a critical skills shortage in security. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs available and new jobs are popping up every day, but we've no one to fill them. Now, instead of waiting for us to solve it in the security team, what if every member of our development team all around the world was able to do just 1 hour of security every sprint? So that's like 1 hour of security every 2 weeks. Now, that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. It's a tiny, tiny amount. You probably waste more time each day, fiddling around in your web browser or trying to catch up in Slack. But if every single one of us, all 30 million, did that 1 hour, that will be a phenomenal force for good in security. And the thing we need to remember with application security in particular is that the best people to defend our code are the people who know it the best, who designed it, who built it. And so the more we can embrace this mission and let everyone in our dev team be part of that security mission, the more pragmatic and realistic our approaches to security will grow to be. Just like at the moment, our dev teams are managing performance and scaling and usability and accessibility, this just becomes part of code quality and it becomes part of their culture. So that's where my mission comes from. And, it's a big mission. But I actually think it's really important and it's really achievable because we're not asking people for a lot, just 1 hour every 2 weeks. And that can make all the difference.
So what you mean is every developer should be a security developer, right?
Absolutely. And every tester and every analyst and every architect. So if you're in the software team, you have a role to play in security.
Should we extend this to product managers and designers as well?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, product folk, I love product folk. You are the guardians of the mission. You link the business to the software product. Without your viewpoint, without your authority, nothing gets built. So if we're able to bring security into every conversation that goes into the design and then later build of our software, then it shouldn't be the case we find bugs late because we've already anticipated them. We've already thought about them. And it reduces that likelihood and then the ongoing cost of remediation.
I agree with you. In the software development lifecycle, when we have more folks thinking about security at every stage, different roles and different stages, when you incorporate security practices in it, high chance that we'll build more secure products. But is there a risk that there'll be a lot more friction introduced into the product building process?
I think naively done, it could introduce a lot of friction. So if you were a security team person, for example, and you went to a big conference, let's say, RSA or Black Hat, and you went and you spent your security budget on a big magic box that's going to help your AppSec team do something. I think API security is in fashion this year. Now, if you came and just said, hey, here's your new toy, off you go, you now have to use this, that's never going to work. That's always going to introduce friction. The best changes made to a development lifecycle are done with three things in mind. Understanding the benefit of the change, why are we doing this, and communicating it to the dev team. Understanding the impact on that dev environment, whether it's complexity, cost, time to process, looking for all those points of friction and then understanding the relationship between the two. And it's only when you do little experiments rapidly between both engineers and security can you find that sweet spot balance of the changes you can make in that life cycle that won't actually cause friction and actually reduce the amount of security overall.
Okay, that's interesting. So the balance here is between being more security conscious and making sure that our product still gets built with as little friction as possible. One thing that comes to mind when we talk about this is also today anybody can pick up a book and go to a boot camp and turn out to be a product manager or a designer. If you learn how to develop in Figma, design in Figma, you could say that, okay, I can do some design tasks now. If I learn how to write some backend code, create some APIs, write some front-end code, I could be doing back-end work, front-end developers work. If you write a spec and you start studying products, you could wake up and build talk about building a product, right? This is the barrier to entry is low. It's low because you can just do it, but it's high because you need to develop some good skills before companies trust you to do that, right? So there is a balance. But what I'm seeing is in the whole field of IT, information technology, it is cybersecurity, which is becoming more of a licensed activity. Like, for example, what I see here happening in Singapore is the cybersecurity agency is requiring all pen testers or managed SOC providers, security operations center providers, to get a license, to apply for a license with CSA. And so when you look at the requirements for getting the license, it's not yet very stringent. It's actually quite possible for you to apply. And if you have your background, okay, you meet some threshold, you're broadly going to get your license. But I'm seeing this as a first step of many. Before, in future, it's possible that you may lose your license as a pen tester, or you may lose your license as a managed SOC provider in Singapore if you are found to be not doing your work properly. Now, this brings us into the category of people who are lawyers, doctors, who can also lose their license, if they're not running their practice in a proper manner. What are your thoughts on this? Is it a good thing that Singapore is doing here, or is there any other way of doing this even better?
It's an interesting time. So I was a penetration tester for 8 years before I ran a consultancy. So I've been very near this. And when I was in the UK, I literally sat next to the team in the UK government who managed the Czech certification, which was the UK government's equivalent if you wanted to do penetration testing for the government. That later became CREST, which became global. And it was an opt-in framework. It was voluntary, but the idea was that you got preferred, vendor relationships if you were able to prove the certification. In security, particularly in penetration testing, I can see the benefit of that licensing. I would be very scared if somebody who's just, very enthusiastically watched a lot of YouTube videos and played on some bug bounties was then testing my production infrastructure. I feel like that's going to go a little bit wrong. But that barrier is high. And what we've seen in many markets is the cost of getting those licenses and maintaining them can be prohibitive to some of the smaller, more innovative players. So you end up with a market saturated by, the Deloittes and KPMGs and the big names in the space who don't necessarily have, they have great pen testers, but, there's no measure of whether they are better or worse than a smaller company. But, brand names and the power behind those big companies will always be able to influence those schemes. So, I'm pro proving your credentials, especially if it does impact on safety or there's a risk involved. However, I think it has to be mindfully done. And I think that if we're going to do it, I'm a much bigger proponent of technical-based tests rather than just, reference-based systems or, you happen to work for this employer. So what they did with the OSCP qualification in pen testing, while that's a little extreme in some cases, that kind of thing. The OS in OSCP is Offensive Security Certified Professional. So that is a standard qualification for penetration testers. Now, it comes out of a profit-making company, Offensive Security, but it has very quickly risen to be one of the leading qualifications that you would expect a penetration tester to have in their arsenal. So rather than getting a more academic qualification that requires like a multiple choice test, this one actually makes you go and hack boxes and simulates the environment that you would see in a penetration test. So it's seen as rigorous. Going back to the governments and whether they could enforce that, though, the problem is scaling it. And anytime you get a system that requires that much technical control, then you've got to scale up the amount of people and the vigilance of enforcing it. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a sign of the times. In engineering, I can't see it going that way, though. I think engineering, there's a few places on earth where software engineering is counted as the same type of engineering. I think Germany is one of them. And in all honesty, the development community, there's too much of it. There's too many of them. It goes too fast. And I can't see anything like that taking off.
So then because you have this vision, which you say 30 million security developers, right? At the same time, certification may be difficult to get for everyone. There is a signaling effect to it. Like if you get certification, you go through the OSCP process, or you go through some kind of certified ethical hacker process. You have some credentials which shows that you can do some work to some level of quality, and then every 3 years or every year, depending on the certification, you have to renew your license. Signaling effect is better than reference-based systems, right?
Yeah.
Should that flow into the engineering community? Would you say? I think earlier you alluded to it, but just want to dive a bit deeper and be very clear for the audience. Should every software developer have some kind of security certification?
So I don't necessarily think they need a certification, but I think they need some training. So in some communities within development, so in the test community, for example, there's the ISTQB, which is the international body for testing. It's a systems testing international standards body. Now they have syllabuses for a foundational tester upwards, and they have a specialist syllabus and a curriculum for security testers. So if you wanted to be a professional QA person, you can choose to go down that certification route and become a certified QA person in security. It's not the same as a pen tester. It's more focused on that automation testing and the type of testing you do in a dev lifecycle. Now, the testing field likes its certification, so that makes sense for them. In development, we used to have a lot of certifications. Back in the day, there was the certified Java developers and certified .NET developers, and now everyone writes in so many languages and in so many frameworks in so many different ways that it would be chaos. So instead of having a certificate, because I don't think it would be manageable, I think we need to define the curriculum, or at least the levels of expectation of things we should know, and find ways to teach those and show that we've completed education. But the certificate itself, I think, would be unmanageable.
Thank you for sharing this. I think you have shared your point of view very clearly. So appreciate it. The next question that I have for you is, as a lecturer in the application security field, right, with your experience working with government and corporate sectors, how do you think the roles and responsibilities of cyber security professionals have evolved over the years? What should folks do to be prepared for the future? The present is AI. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, you just have to look at the background of security teams to see the evolution, right? When we look 15, 20 years back, a lot of security folk came from networking backgrounds. That was our primary focus, was the physical networking border. Not only have our networks changed, our software has changed dramatically in that time. The way that we deploy, the way that we build, the frequency of it, everything has changed. So the skills that we valued and the way the role looked 15, 20 years ago was phenomenally different. It was really based about how do we keep the border to our little empire safe. But now if you say, I'm going to be a security leader, that's like saying I'm going to move to Europe. It's a huge place and there's many, many different things going on in there, and you can't possibly do all of them. So you really have to pick an area. And so security leadership becomes about not being an expert in security of all of the things. It becomes a leadership role, a true communication, prioritization, and strategy role, where you're bringing together experts from different spaces to adapt to your environment. So if you've got dev teams, you're going to have somebody in AppSec who's taking care of your product security. You're going to have the folks in the cloud, probably, instead of your internal network folks these days. You're going to have a risk and compliance team or individual, depending on your scale, who take care of that bit, because those skills very, very different to the other two. So I think our leaders now need to, instead of just focusing on are we safe in here and did we keep them out? It's more about, are we taking all of the steps we can through all elements of our business What are the trade-offs we're making? And how do we make sure that we're detecting issues quickly and responding to them? And then communicating that up to the board and executive team, who will need to make those really important decisions about, overall direction, budget, spend, risk.
So we're coming to that in a short bit, communication to the board, right? I just want to dive a little bit deeper into the question that I asked. What is the role of zero trust in the current times? We speak about it quite a lot. Did it work well in practice? Is it widely adopted? What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, look, we have a swear jar. We have a jar here at SafeStack, the zero trust swear jar that you have to put $1 in when you say zero trust. It has very much moved from technical term to marketing term now. And that's a shame in a way. There are some really incredible white papers, particularly out of the US government from as long back as 10 years ago now, that define what zero trust really was anticipated to do. But I think if we step away from the marketing elements of it, and look at the fundamentals of what we were trying to convey with it, I think this is just a retelling of the same story we've known for a while. That no matter whether you're inside or outside, or where you are in an architecture or a network or a system, that we can't just infer trust because we are there, because we are present, because we have the right name. We have to make sure that every action, every request, every connection has layers of authentication, authorization, that we have that visibility and transparency over them to ensure that we don't assume anything. And I think when we apply those principles and apply them consistently over our architectures, it can work. The trouble is we're not very good at doing it consistently. That we still have what we call at SafeStack armadillo security companies, which armadillos, little creatures, very hard shell, very tickly tummy. So you've got a really good hard border, nothing's trusted, you verify everything, you validate everything, really, really good. You do pen tests every 6 months, you're sorted. But when it comes to the things you've deployed onto your internal network, well, they'll be fine. It's all good. It's inside the network. Nobody could ever harm us here. And we can't think like that anymore. Not in the time with, massively distributed systems, with many of us working from home or hybrid working environments.
It's so interesting what you just shared. I was speaking to a senior security leader just last week on Friday, and he was saying that if you were to test us from the outside in, if you were to run a scan on my network, you'd probably get a score out of 100, 98 or 99, right? But if you were to go a little bit deeper, the score would drop. And if you were to come inside, you realize that, oh my God, what's going on? There's all kinds of vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And that's really natural, right? If we look at the physical world as a proxy for it, we're used to the idea that, in olden days where we'd build a fortress or a castle, you'd have layers of walls, and the further you got from the center, those, higher the walls, the more intense the defensive controls. And by the time you got to the middle, everyone was having a party. So we build our things the same way. We layer those controls outwards, and the closer you get, the more trusted inside that network, the more likely we are to have these preventable security issues that, they're just the basics. There's nothing glamorous there. It's just the basics that every nation now has a set of control lists that we should be following.
Interesting. So, okay, let me just extend this in a unique way now. What would be the physical representation of zero trust? So, what you just shared is, as you get further away from the center, the walls are higher, the moats are thicker. But once you get to the middle, everyone's having a party, right? What does the zero trust equivalent look like?
I think it's about, well, if we take like the things like authentication and authorization, it's like when I used to work at KPMG, I once got into a lot of trouble. And there was a gentleman, he was walking around the staircase in tennis wear. And I was like, what is this? And so I being very young, I was like, excuse me, I can't see a badge or anything. Why are you here? And he was like, oh, no, I've just forgotten it. And I was a security person. So I'm like, no. So I escorted him out the building. Now, it turns out he was one of the directors that I'd just not met. And he was genuinely on his way to tennis practice. And I just really screwed up his evening. It's the idea that even in the trusted parts of our building, inside our castle, where the party is happening, that we've got the ability to verify identity and to check those authorizations. So are you supposed to be here? Are you still supposed to be here? Are you supposed to go into that room and not this one? And that seems quite tedious, but done right, it doesn't have to be invasive or intrusive. It just becomes built into the interactions you have. And making sure you have logging and monitoring and the detective controls in those interior bits just as much as you do on the exterior. because, you want to make sure you can catch a bad thing happening no matter where it starts, even if it starts in the middle of a party. I think we've extended that metaphor as far as it can go now.
I know, but we love talking about parties. So, see, I think what you mentioned here is highly relevant, because what's happening in this world right now is that we have people who are manually checking these controls, and the controls have grown so much they're becoming onerous. Your words were earlier, your word was tedious, right? I would say it's actually become onerous, because now you're verifying, are you supposed to be here? Are you still supposed to be here? And that's being done on a manual basis, right? For identity and access management, there are ways to automate this. And the number of controls that a risk and compliance professional would need to monitor, it's not humanly possible to do it, with your eyes, just a pair of eyes.
Absolutely.
Right. What do you see in the space? What interesting innovation work do you see happening in this space, if any at all?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of movement here, because we're all sick of spreadsheets, if I'm honest. Like, all of us have been tortured with spreadsheets for far too long. Whether it's, because you're selling to a new customer and they've sent their compliance one through, whether it's the regimes you have to audit against, it's painful, and they're all different. And so I'm excited to see things like the unification of some of these things. So there's several platforms and technologies and tools now that are just trying to translate all of these standards next to each other, so you don't have to go through each one separately. They can cross-reference. That's awesome. The world doesn't need any more standards. We have more than enough now. What we need to do now is navigate them sensibly and quickly. The other thing is we're able to automate quite a lot of checks. So I'm a really lazy person. And that's not a bad thing. I run a small company. I can't be doing all of these things manually. And so what I try and look for is as many of these security controls as possible. I want to be able to automate the checks that they're being done. And the more of that we do, the more consistent we are with monitoring, so we can do it frequently without any human effort. And then the quicker we can respond when something changes. And I think that's really positive, because in the old days where we're just doing manual audits and we're doing spot checks, and that doesn't lend itself well to what we really wanted to achieve, which is rapid detection of issues and rapid response to them.
So if I were to push this thought a bit more, automating control checks and getting that tied up with alerting, logging, and monitoring in such a way that if a control breaks, you're able to get alerts and start responding to them. This is potentially improving your security posture as well, and also elevating the workload from your staff, requiring you to hire less people, also allowing you to get things done in a way that's more accurate as well. Is that correct? Am I missing something?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for the people you do hire, you're taking away boring bits of their job. And security folk aren't boring people. They're very skilled technical professionals. So if you can take away the boring bits of their job that everyone's just like, this again, I don't want to do this, then they can focus on the really high value stuff. So working on those new projects that you're rolling out, making sure the design for things are certain and set away. And that's what we want those people focusing on. It's very, it's a bad use of resources when we pay a lot of money for security folk for them to spend their time on things that could have been a short script.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. So thanks for putting it this way, Laura. The next question I have is, as the Vice Chair of the New Zealand Internet Task Force and board member of Hackers Helping Hackers, can you share some of your insights into the importance of collaboration and knowledge sharing in cybersecurity across different regions and communities? I'll give a bit of context now. I see this happening in the military context quite a bit. What do you see happening in the private sector?
So I think what you see happening in the private sector is not the same as what is happening in the private sector. So it used to be that there were just working groups, and they were these kind of slow-moving committee type things. Like the New Zealand Internet Task Force is a good example of this. It's a great organization. It started 15 or so years ago. And it's quite a traditional trust platform. So you vouch and you vote people in, and if they're trusted and they know some other people, they can come in. But what we're seeing now is an explosion of scale. That kind of old-fashioned trust network, they don't work so well when there's so many companies who need to be involved, and we can't just vouch for each of them individually. We're seeing a lot of closed door Discords and Slack channels. We're seeing communities spring up where they're intentionally curating the audience so that they can make it safe to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing on this. What have you seen? And I think that's really important. One of the things we're very bad at in security, because it makes us feel vulnerable, is sharing when we have a challenge or something is hard. And so there are more and more of these groups popping up where either in person or online, you can, in a safe way, share your challenges and look for other solutions that have been done by peers. And I think that's really important. There's industry-specific groups, transportation, finance, law. They all have their own little cybersecurity communities now. And I think that's really powerful. It shouldn't be the case that just because you compete in your main business, that you can't collaborate with the security teams of similar companies. So I think that's really important, and I hope that it continues and grows.
What's the best way to facilitate this collaboration in a competitive context, right? Because information that let's say a company that you're working in suffers a security attack, and you're in a spot where you're doing root cause analysis, you're stuck somewhere, you need some help. It can't be a safe space to reach out to your functional WhatsApp group and say, "Hey guys, because
it's all gone wrong. It's on fire. Help."
Yes. So what's a safe way to set yourself up?
So we at SafeStack have our own community that we've built for this, and we've made a very specific choice in that. So we allow folks to ask anonymous questions. So there's a mechanism in place that you can share what you're comfortable with, and it is posed to the group in a way that is not identifiable to the individual. Now, that does take a bit of proxying and work to make that happen, but that gives that mechanism, that safety at the scale that we're talking about. I think there's always going to be a risk in any community that how deep does the trust grow? And I think we all have large communities where we're part of thousands of people talking about high level, and the communities get smaller and smaller and smaller. And you'll find yourself normally in a trust group with 5 or 6 individuals where you're like, okay, I can pick up a phone to this person. And I think it's going to be different for each of us as to how much we can share and what we can't in those, and what industry you're in and what regulation you're under. But I do encourage folks to look at what their options are. If you're in government, you probably can't do those things, but there's probably mechanisms internally you can use. If you're out in private industry, if you're in a young company, you've got less to worry about than you think. Find some advisors through your investors, through your board. They will help you. And if you're in larger companies, your board equally, they have an obligation to care about these things. They're going to be able to help you find the support you need, whether it's as an individual one-to-one or broader communities.
Thanks for sharing this, Laura. This word that you mentioned, that the board has an obligation to care about these things, we are seeing this become very clear in the US. Do you see such clarity across the world, especially in Asia Pacific as well?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that coming up. So in New Zealand, where I live, and in Australia, we're now seeing board obligations explicitly stating that cybersecurity is a risk area that needs to be managed, and that the board have their directorial level obligations on that space. Now, it's still early days, and what that means in reality is still being fleshed out. But I know the Institute of Directors in New Zealand and similar organizations elsewhere are working very hard to form, the types of curriculums and support that you would need as a board member to understand that. I think the most important thing you can do if you are a board member or you're in this executive space is to be curious. So whenever we're faced with a new risk domain as a director, it's very easy to take a very defensive approach, because anytime you have a conversation about a risk, you have this obligation to address it, and that puts you into this really complex situation. Now, you don't need to necessarily be having all of these conversations in every board meeting, but go and talk with the seniors in the company, go and talk with the exec team, and really understand the language they use, the types of things they're thinking about before it gets to board, because that's going to give you that safer opportunity to really talk that through. And also, there's a whole bunch of podcasts and resources out there now for executives about, understanding the concepts that you might be hearing, understanding the options that are out there, and making you feel a little bit less alone, especially if your background isn't particularly technical or cybersecurity is new to you.
I can imagine for an investor who takes a board seat, he has to worry about steering the company, or at least helping the management steer the company in a direction where there's growth, there's profits. Adding on product management, product development, hats is already complex, but now adding cybersecurity might be impossible, near impossible, right? Because it just stacks up. The challenges just stack up. He or she may spend some time talking to folks in the industry or even in the company to gain an understanding and awareness, but that's going to be at a base level. What I see in the US, which I fully support, is there's a requirement that there has to be expertise at the board level for cybersecurity because the risk is just so big and it's difficult to grasp fully, right? I'm coming to the next question, which I wanted to ask you, which is how do we communicate the return on investment for cybersecurity to the board? And I think here's where what you shared makes a lot of sense, because if, let's say, members of the board take some time to just ramp up on cyber knowledge, when tech leaders or business folks or cybersecurity practitioners come and say, this is why we need to invest in XYZ initiatives, programs, tools, people will get it, right? But getting it is different from being able to understand there's going to be a return on the investment. How should we think about these things at the board level?
Yeah, and I think so. Return on investment in security is really difficult to measure. And there's been lots of very clever people have tried, and lots of marketing companies have tried. What it's not going to be is we have 99% less bugs than we had last month. That's just not good. If you're seeing any measures that are like, we've stopped 75% of nation state attacks, just ignore it. That's not a good return on investment. That's just made up numbers. But the types of things you can look at are in places you wouldn't expect. So, for example, if you're in a high growth company and you're selling to companies all around the world, your sales cycle has a certain cadence, and somewhere in it, somebody is going to start asking you about the security of your company, because as part of that purchase, they have to assess whether your company poses risk to their company and whether that risk is acceptable. Now, having a proactive approach to security and having that mindset across the team, it changes the way the business runs. It can simplify decisions. It can remove complexity because, well, what's the point in doing this if it's going to make security really hard and not really benefit people? Let's simplify. And as a result, sales can speed up. As a result, your market reputation can increase. So you can actually start using this as a growth enabler. Now, I'm not saying go out and put on your website, we do security, we care about security as a marketing thing. That's a terrible idea. But using the frameworks that you know you're going to be held to as a filtering mechanism to prioritize and to focus is really, really helpful for that. The other ROI is you can look at, how much time are you spending remediating and doing issues in your company? Not all issues are security issues, but remediation is a sign of something hasn't been spotted. There was some lack of vigilance. Something has passed a gate that it shouldn't have. And so if you are spending a lot of time reworking things, projects are running over, using security as an extra level for an extra set of vigilance can speed those things up, can reduce the likelihood of remediation, which costs a lot. It's really context specific. If you're in a power company, your ROI is going to look very, very different to if you're in a fashion fintech type hybrid thing. So really look at what you already measure as your metrics and what success looks like in the wider organization, and then see if you can apply it across to security.
Thanks for sharing that, Laura. In your background in computer science and AI, let's tune into that a little bit. How do you envision the future of AI in cybersecurity? Opportunities, potential risk that we should be aware of, as now everyone is at least moving towards a digital first era. If not, we are already in the digital era. Now it's going to be an AI first era as we move forward, right? So what guidance do you have for us?
So I think the first thing to do is, if you're anything like me, the last few weeks have been full of kind of a disconnect. Half of me is super excited about this crazy new world that we're living in. And half of me as a security person is like, what on earth is this? What are we doing? This is a terrible idea. And I live in both states at the same time. That's very confusing. On the exciting side, and I think you really do have to remain excited about technology as a security person. If as a security person, you're finding yourself overly negative, that you can't see the benefit in the future technologies, then it's time to step back, because our job is not to be the cynical doom and gloom. It's to see the excitement and find a safe path to get to it. So for me, the exciting use cases of AI of all kinds. So AI in healthcare to, speed up the diagnosis of things like cancer in areas where you don't have a specialist to review your scans. That's fantastic. We're seeing prototypes of being able to do scans for common cancers in your supermarket, which, again, that might be a little bit too close to home and a little bit too public. But the principle's pretty cool, right? If you would normally live somewhere rural without a specialist in town, that could make the difference of life or death for someone. We're seeing it in rural areas. So there's some really interesting generative AI being used across India in populations that aren't normally engaging with government services, to use natural language and generative AI technologies to increase engagement with support services to support small businesses and individuals in getting access to money, grants, all sorts of things. And I think as an enabler, particularly to communities that are not necessarily technical, there are some amazing things coming that will help people out without us needing to send more people in to fix problems. I think the risk we have, however, is the speed that we go and the care that we take with the data that is being used. And so an AI model, there's two powerful things in it. There's the model itself and the algorithm, and then there's the corpus, what it's been trained on. And you need both. It's not a one or the other sort of job. Now, with the algorithm, we've got to come up with a new way as security folk, as engineers, to understand how we do a threat assessment on an algorithm that evolves over time. Because we can't say if I put in an apple at one end and it always comes out as an orange, it's always going to do steps 1, 2, and 3. In these new systems, we're going to put an apple in and sometimes it's going to come out as an elephant and we don't know why. So we've got to think about how in these nonlinear systems we can understand the risk and the outcomes that are possible. Now, the other side is that data. Now, there's a lot of controversy on the internet at the moment about which data is being used to feed which models, and consent and licensing. Indigenous populations have got concerns about data sovereignty and their cultural. In New Zealand, we call it the mana, the power of the data. And all of that's going to be very, very complex. So as a security person, it's not just complex, but it mixes together privacy, it mixes together security. It puts into question, well, how much data do you need to put into a model to influence the outcomes of it? And I think all of these are still very much unknown. They're very good, very big challenges to solve, but I think we've got some work to do before we get to a level where we could trust this with very sensitive things.
Okay. And I think already a lot of people are trusting it with very sensitive things.
Yeah. That's human nature. We're given a new toy, we're going to put all of our things in it on the first day and try and figure out what happens.
Therefore, naturally, what's going to happen is we're going to make some mistakes and learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to be proactive about it. So what needs to be done? And I think what Sam from OpenAI is doing is he has opted to release this into the world first and let humanity, in his words, from what I saw of him speaking in Singapore, as far as I can recall, is in his words, let humanity grow with AI and vice versa, which to me is like what he said, it's both exciting and scary at the same time. It's the first time in my career where I felt for technology exciting and a little bit worried at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. My family describe it as a Pandora's box. Sam built the box and then opened it. And now we have to figure out how to deal with it. In some ways, that forcing that circumstance will be an acceleration in terms of us having to figure out how to deal with it. Because once you're faced with a problem, you have to solve it. Yes. But at the same time, there will probably be collateral damage during this process where, data is misused, or, we're already seeing, deep fakes used for malicious and nefarious means. And so I think we're going to see some bad stuff before we get to the bottom of it. I don't believe that regulation will catch up quick enough either to save this. I think it's going to be on individuals and on, groups to make good choices. And I love being a human. We're all humans. It's great, but we're terrible at this stuff. So it's going to be really interesting to see, how tolerant as a society we are of AI not being well looked after or maintained, or that it could cause harm to people.
One thing that is promising is I believe governments globally are already at least thinking, if not actively discussing, about having a governance model around this. And the reference that is being commonly spoken about, I think this is in media as well, has to do with the governance that is used for nuclear arms, right? So,
oh, wow.
So there is some discussion around that. Do you think it'd be a good idea for there to be a global governance model for AI, or should countries develop and adopt their own?
I think global would be better, but global is also very difficult for us to implement normally. Culturally, we have so many different views on the world. You just have to look at normal politics to see how well we've done in the past where something has tried to be global. The other side that makes me smile a little bit, and it's a wry smile, like a sad smile, is that regulation is for the good people. Regulation is for the law-abiding citizens and the folks who want to follow the law. This technology is out in the world for good or bad now. And the folks who may use it for harm are not necessarily the same folks who would then go, oh, well, this is against the law, I should probably not do that. So I think it's as well as regulation, there will need to be a lot of oversight as to what is springing up and how it's being used, so that those people who choose to ignore regulation or sit outside it for whatever reason are still held to account.
Okay, thank you for sharing this. On a separate thread, what are your thoughts on helping inculcate a security mindset in developers at an engineering course? I keep coming back to your 30 million vision, which I think is super interesting. What can we do at the engineering course level itself? In your experience, what changes can be made before developers graduate? So every developer has a security mindset.
Yeah, so I think we do need to universally make sure that folks who are entering the career have at least the foundations in place. And they need to understand what a risk is, what threat is, and that the decisions they make have impacts. And sometimes those impacts can be harmful. And that doesn't necessarily have to be deeply technical. It's just a way of seeing systems in the same way we teach ethics and privacy. But we need to teach it universally. And at the moment, what we're seeing is pockets. We'll see little 1 or 2 universities or colleges that will do it, and others will not. Or it's an elective, it's an optional module. And it needs to be fundamental, it needs to be core. Now, at SafeStack, we don't believe that there's a solution out there yet for this. What we've done, and we encourage others to do similar things, or to support what we're doing, is we've actually put our money where our mouth is. We are paying and supporting every final year computer science student in Australia and New Zealand to do our training free, because we truly believe that if we are going to create a generational shift in software engineering where security is just part of it, it has to start on day one of your career. So we're doing that now. And the way to do that is to encourage the larger organizations, like the ones we work with in our normal day-to-day, to invest so that some of that goes back in at the start. Now, they benefit in the long term because they have these skilled engineers coming through, and we're able to do something with it. So I think our larger organizations, that the big enterprises, wherever they are in the world, we have more power and resource than we realize a lot of the time. And even just simple, partnering with a university, providing exposure to students can have a huge impact. I think we need to do more of that, create more visibility in those students.
Thanks so much, Laura. This has been a very enlightening conversation. Really enjoyed speaking with you. Are there any final thoughts that you have for our audience? These folks are developers, they're product managers, designers, investors. Any thoughts, any final words for the audience?
So me and my team did some research with the UCLA School of Management, Anderson School of Management last year. And we asked a question. That question was, what is the biggest impact or influencer when it came to a young growing company, whether it's, seed stage or scaling up? What's the biggest influencer to them starting to do anything with security? And we expect it to be regulation, or we expected it to be a customer, and it wasn't. It was their investors. So 9 out of 10 people we spoke to 1,050 people over the course of a few weeks, said that the biggest force for security that they had was their investors, and their investors didn't even realize that most of the time. So if you are an investor, just remember that whether it feels like it or not, the message you send to your portfolio companies, it resonates, and it resonates all the way through the company. So if you allow space and you allow small prioritization for security, it will echo through and it will happen. If you are inside the roles, if you're an engineer or if you're a product person, you don't have to conquer the whole elephant in one day, to butcher an analogy. If you are at the very beginning and your organization basically does nothing right now and it's chaos, we don't judge. None of us do. We've all been there. Be where you are right now and try and take one step forward. 80% of the common security attacks we see are really boring known issues that can be solved with some considered effort and a little bit of time. So take your time, take a step forward each day. It's not about being done. There's no being done in security. So the best thing you can do is accept that. Don't waste any effort on trying to be 100%. Just try and be a little bit better than you were yesterday.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thanks for your time today.
You're welcome.